we think of Jesus as gentle and meek and mild, um, but he isn't necessarily. And what makes it, in a sense, okay is that um, he sets the standards. It's not that we set the standards, right? And
Right.
so we're not here to say, man, you're mean, Jesus. You need a better tone or whatever, because he's presenting himself as the one who gets to decide.
Voices of WIA is just one of the many ways Women in Apologetics strives to educate, equip, and encourage women in Christian apologetics. If you love Voices of WIA, then I invite you to join our free email community where you'll receive apologetic resources every single week and enjoy email community only benefits like exclusive digital guides and a discount to our annual conference. And you can sign up today by visiting womeninapologetics.com/email dash community. They say that God has no grandchildren. Each of us must find our own faith. Have you ever wondered what that looks like for you? How you might know what you believe, but do you know why you believe it? Today's guest is Dr. Lydia McGrew, and she's going to walk us through some of the ways that we can know that Jesus is who he says he is and that the Bible is telling us the truth. So, our guest today is Dr. Lydia McGrew, who is a widely published analytic philosopher and author. She received her PhD in English from Vanderbilt University in 1995, and she has published extensively in the theory of knowledge, specializing in formal epistemology and in its application to the evaluation of testimony and to the philosophy of religion. She defends the reliability of the Gospels and Acts in 4 books, including the Eye of the Beholder, the Gospel of John as historical reportage, and testimonies to the truth, why you can trust the Gospels. Dr. McGrew, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about the conversation. I think what you have to talk about, to share with us today, is going to be hugely helpful, practically speaking and devotionally speaking, so that we know why we believe what we believe. So thank you for coming on our show today.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think maybe just getting started is the best place to start. Tell us about your faith background. What got you started in this direction?
Well, I was raised in a conservative Baptist home. I gave my life to Jesus when I was a very young child, very sincerely. Um, but it wasn't a really strongly evidential background.
Sure.
That wasn't really what they specialized in. And eventually, when I was only 16 years old, I went to college, to a Bible college in Pennsylvania. And there I met Tim McGrew, who was just 7 months older than I was. And we began dating. And eventually, through his influence, I really realized the need to have more reasons to believe what I believe. And then when you fast forward quite some years beyond that, we began actually putting philosophy to application in defending the Christian faith and then getting to know about additional resources from the 19th century
Mm.
for defending the Gospels. And that was really exciting and in part really drove my starting to publish in New Testament studies.
Okay, so at some point you began with a faith like most of us do. You simply were exposed to it at a really young age, didn't have any trouble accepting it, probably had some kind of notion of, sin and the need for repentance. But at some point after that, that's when you realized that you needed to put some feet to your faith or put some
Mhm.
foundation to your faith, or at least have some sort of a reason why
Mhm.
you were continuing to hold to Christianity and follow Christianity and take it seriously. So you met Dr. McGrew, and then from that point forward, you began kind of figuring out which reasons appealed to you, which reasons made sense to you, which ones fascinated you. Is that basically kind of how it went?
Well, and his specialty eventually, and we were doing this kind of together, but his specialty was always theory of knowledge. And so I learned to be really interested in that too. And the
Yeah.
we realized that there were reasons that there are reasons that are objectively good and reasons that are objectively not so good. And so then the idea was we've got to find reasons that are objectively good. The apologist John Warwick Montgomery was actually a big influence on Tim, his writings, his books, and through Tim, a big influence on me in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting story. I think most people, I know I get this question from time to time, was that if you did you come to faith through apologetics? Well, no, I didn't. But learning apologetics though, in my opinion, is like another subset of discipleship. It helps me
Mhm.
to appreciate the fact that the faith that I kind of came to naturally is real, and that I'm not, it's not a limitation or a liability that I have this faith. So I think that's really important.
It is. It's very important because otherwise, you get that thrown at you. If you were raised in a Muslim country, you'd be Muslim,
Right.
etc. And if you've never developed your own evidences for yourself, you don't have an answer to that.
That's exactly right. And these days, that question comes up a lot. And so we really need to have those answers because people are asking those questions more often than they used to. So apparently, at some point, he was already doing work on the argument from undesigned consequences. Is that
Coincidences.
correct? Okay. So, what can you tell us about that?
Right. Well, it's a great argument. It's so old that it's new in a sense. So it was the term undesigned coincidences was coined as long ago as the late 1700s, actually, and then used in the 1800s. Um, I like to illustrate it by giving a made up example from
Okay.
now because I
Okay.
think that's really helpful to people. So if
Okay.
you have two people who say they watched um, a bank robbery and they're giving their testimony, one of them says, let's imagine, the bank robber tripped as he ran away. And then the other witness is being interviewed by the police, and he says he describes the bank robber's clothes, and he says, and his shoe was untied. So the guy who says he tripped doesn't mention that the shoe was untied. The guy who says the shoe was untied doesn't mention that he tripped. But the untied shoe explains that he tripped. And
Sure.
so those come together, and neither witness looks like they're trying to uh, compliment what the other person is saying. They're just telling what they remember, and then it fits together like reality fits together. And that's evidence that they're both telling the truth.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. You know what? I didn't know that had a name. When I was looking at all the information prior to our show, I had never heard that argument before. The argument from undesigned, I think I said consequences early, undesigned coincidences.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
had not really heard that as a specific argument, I don't think. I'm not
Hmm.
totally sure. But anyway, that makes all the sense in the world, is that things would kind of happen to fit together um, because of reality, because reality kind of does that, causes and effects. They kind of make those things happen, go together. And so you seem to think that this has special application to the book of John. Is that correct?
All of the four gospels have them, but
All of them.
yes,
Okay.
they all do, and even you
Okay.
even have them in between the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But then you have even more of them between Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John. And the reason is because John tells so many unique stories. Like
Okay.
there are a lot of stories in John that the um, aren't
Hmm.
in the other three gospels. So
Hmm.
here's an example of how John fits with the others. Um, in John, Jesus cleanses the temple early in his ministry. I believe he did it twice. It was like a protest he was doing, which people sometimes do their protests more than once. And they come and they say to him, um, show us a sign of your authority to do this. And he says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And they're like, what? And then John explains that he's talking about his body. He's predicting his
Right.
resurrection. All right. Um, that's not found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But when you go over to Mark, and you get the description of Jesus' trial. So that's like 3 years later, at least, maybe 4 years later. And he's before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders, and they have witnesses against him. And one of the witnesses say, he said he would destroy the temple and raise it again in 3 days. And you're like, what's that all about? Like, why are they saying this? Like, there's no explanation of where that accusation is coming from in the what are called the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But the explanation is over in John, that he had said this, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And then that got
Okay.
garbled like things do, and then it was brought up against him years later at his trial. So that's an example of an undesigned coincidence between John and the other gospels.
Okay. That seems really significant to me. Of course, I've been a Christian for a really long time. I've read all four gospels. I tend to think of the gospels as a group, and I guess technically they are, but there are some specific differences in John that we as Christians should be aware of, because it sounds like this particular element of the gospels, the undesigned coincidences, is really going to apply to John in a specific way, which is important because John is the Christological gospel. It's kind of the one that has the highest, most Christ focused aspect or description of Jesus's identity. So I think that makes a lot of sense that we as Christians would want to scout those out, don't you, to really understand the book of John and see those for what they are?
Well, yeah, and recognizing his separateness is actually a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
cool. The way I put it is the more John tells us, the more he has the opportunity to be verified. And so that
Yes.
that's really cool. Now, I would like to give one real quick between two of the synoptics, which
Okay.
is another cool one. So in Matthew, he's about to tell the story of the death of John the Baptist. Herod beheaded John the Baptist, you know, and he says that leads into it. Jesus is ministering, and Herod's like, I wonder who this guy is, and he says this is John the Baptist, must be John the Baptist risen from the dead. Um, and it says he said it to his servants. And so you could say to yourself, like, is Matthew just making that up? Like, how could Matthew know what Herod said to his servants? He doesn't have a little microphone in there. Maybe she's just doing it to make it more colorful or vivid or whatever. But you go over to Luke, completely different context. Uh, Luke is listing some women who financially contributed to Jesus' ministry. And there's one woman who's only mentioned in Luke, and he lists her, Joanna, Luke says, the wife of Huzzah, Herod's steward, his household manager. So
Oh,
now we can put together, how
great.
could Matthew
Yes.
know what Herod was saying to his servants, because this woman was the wife of his household manager. So that's
Yes.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that. So she was in a position to know what was said to the
Yeah.
servants because
Yep.
she has such close proximity to it. Yeah, so that's actually a great for all of you who are watching or listening. That is a great argument for a really broad, robust biblical literacy, because you can't
Mm.
tell, not there isn't just one book that tells the whole story with all the details. That's why we need a really robust reading of the Bible. We need to read it really broadly. If you, I like to tell when I'm teaching, a prayer drilling session or something like that. We really want to read the Bible in two ways. Number one is broad and shallow. We just want to get a great big overview of everything to kind of have an idea of how all the pieces and parts fit together. And then we also want to read, devotionally, one book at a time or one topic at a time, and really deep dive. But having that biblical literacy and that really broad understanding of what the Bible says in all of its parts is really important, because otherwise that's a detail you would miss. If the only book you had read was either Matthew or Luke, you wouldn't understand that those two pieces are talking to each other,
Mhm,
essentially, that
mhm,
those two
mhm.
scriptures are talking to each other. So, yeah, I love that. I'm very thankful you pointed that out. So why do you suppose, I think I already know the answer to this question, but why do you suppose the book of John gets so much ire, raises so much ire? Why is it such a target of the skeptics and the critics?
Well, I think it's because it has different stories. And so there's suspicion of that. There's a notion that, he's the odd man out in some way, and that must be some kind of problem. And it's kind of funny because the Synoptic Gospels, scholars believe that there's some kind of literary dependence among them. They're not sure exactly what it is, or they argue about, exactly, but there's some kind of dependence there. So you wouldn't think that it would matter so much that John is different, because it's like some of the similarities among the others are because of their partial literary dependence on each other. So why can't we welcome an independent, separate voice? But instead, his differentness gets treated, especially by those doing what's called the quest for the historical Jesus,
Hmm.
as causing a great big question mark. So if you start with the assumption that each passage in the Gospels has to be supported separately. Like now we're going to, reset and question the next passage. We're going to reset and question the next passage, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, the fact that John has so many passages that are unique automatically is taken to raise a problem. And also what you mentioned to the higher Christological statements,
Mhm.
there's a very strong argument from silence there, and I don't think it's strong, but I'm saying sociologically, it's
Right. Right.
influential. Okay, Bart Ehrman is the king of this, so he'll
Yes.
use this word surely. Surely, if Jesus had really said this, it would be recorded in the other gospels. And you just want to stop him right there and say, no, that's not so clear. There's no rule
Yeah.
that everything has to be told
Right.
in multiple places. That's not a good historical rule. So those two things, his uniqueness and his high Christology, are really used to cast a lot of doubt on John.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely. I have heard those kinds of comments made. So that makes sense. In fact, we're doing John right now in my church. And that's one of the things that my pastor keeps saying over and over and over is if you read John correctly, you'll come out with a much bigger idea about who Jesus is, a much bigger view of who Jesus is because of the way that John is written. So apparently then it's considered to be to the Bible's discredit. It's considered to be deleterious to the Bible that John is different, and therefore the Jesus in John is different than the Jesus in the other Gospels. Is that correct?
That's the claim.
Okay,
Yep, the
so
critical claim.
yes. So, what are we to do with that? What can you help us if someone were to come to us and say something like you had just mentioned about Bart Ehrman saying that
Mhm.
because John has a different take on Jesus, John has a different view of Jesus, and it doesn't necessarily um, totally correspond to what the other gospels say about Jesus, that Jesus and John must not be a credible Jesus. What
Right.
how would you advise us to start with that?
So we've got just this wealth of answers to that, and that's something I'm very excited about. Now, one that you'll hear a lot of other apologists do, and I'm not uh, down on this, but
Sure.
I'm not going to focus on it, is well, there's also high Christology in Mark. So like Jesus claims to be able to forgive sins and that kind of thing. So they don't really disagree. Now, I think that's true, but I think we should also acknowledge that the statements in John are uniquely explicit. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Uniquely like coming right out and just saying, I am before Abraham was, I
Sure.
am. So, and that's fine. So the first response is there's also high Christology in the other gospels. Second response is that the argument from silence against testimony is a very poor one in history. And my husband Tim has published just a secular professional article on this, on all the things in secular history where if we use that argument from silence, we discredit them. So I believe Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs or something like that never mentions the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, does that mean we'd expect it to be
Okay.
in there, but
Sure.
it's not? Things where we would expect someone to say something, uh, he doesn't necessarily. So
Mhm.
we need to handle lightly that. Well, surely they would have mentioned it. Maybe Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We're not sitting down and going, okay, I want to find the absolute strongest thing Jesus ever said in defense of his deity, and I got to be sure to write that down. Maybe that wasn't how they were selecting
Right.
what to say. So be wary of that and don't succumb to that argument from silence. And then the third type of response I have is, man, Jesus is so much the same. And I write about this a lot in my book, The Eye of the Beholder.
Okay.
Um, I have like all these pages, so I'm just going to give you like a few examples, okay?
Okay.
So, first, his language. Jesus' language is sometimes said to be different. No, it's not. So here's an example. Synoptic Gospels, he who saves his life will lose it. Right? We know that. That's in there. John, completely different context, mind you. Not the same context. So it's apparently something he did on a different occasion. He who loves his life will lose it. So apparently, this is just how Jesus talked. He liked to say that. Here's another one in the Synoptics, sets a child before them. He who receives one such child in my name receives me, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. All right, different context. John, um, not the same time. He who receives the one I send receives me, and that meaning the disciples, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. So apparently that's how he liked to talk, in this staged way, and it's in both of them. And I'll just give you a third one. Matthew, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. John, whoever comes to me, I will never cast out. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. So he's calling people to come to him in this
Hmm.
similar language, and many more. I've got several pages of these in The Eye of the Beholder. And then personality and methods of teaching. He uses object lessons. So they're being proud and arguing. He puts a child among them, right? And he says, you must become as this little child. That's in the synoptics. But in John, they're arguing on a different occasion. They did that a lot. And he gets down and he gets down and he washes their feet. And that's another undesigned coincidence. It's actually Luke who tells us they were arguing, but it's on that night, the night he was
Okay.
betrayed. But John who tells us that he washed their feet. It's an object lesson. And that's what Jesus liked to do when he did,
Hmm.
and that so it's the same uh Jesus. Uh just one last one. He's lonely and he's hurt by the abandonment of his friends. Personality. So in the synoptics, could you not watch with me 1 hour? He
Hmm.
tells Peter, James, and John, watch and pray, and he goes away and they fall asleep. And he's hurt. He's hurt by that. In John, a little earlier on that night, it reports he says to them, the time is coming, and you will all scatter and leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. That's only in John. So those are independent testimonies to what Jesus was like on that very night and how sad he was on that very night. And like there's so many more of these showing that he really is the same Jesus. It's very cool.
That's really good. That's good to know because I'm not sure I had considered that a real objection, but I'm glad to know that if that is out there, then these are the ways that we can at least, or the things that we can at least look for to make the connection that he is in fact the same one. You had said earlier prior to the show that the I am statements that comes under fire a lot. The I am statements in the book of John, and apparently there's a school of thought that thinks that John, the author, made up the I am statements?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a biggie. And sometimes this is said in a way that's a little confusing. Someone will say that the I am statements are a quote unquote paraphrase of the high Christology in the synoptics, but it's a misleading use of paraphrase
Mhm.
because the I am statements are completely different scenes. So for example, when Jesus says in the synoptics, you know, uh, your sins are forgiven. Okay, he's implying that he's God, be able to
Right.
forgive sins, but that's in Galilee. Whereas him saying before Abraham was I am is in Jerusalem talking to a completely different crowd. So you can't really call that a paraphrase. So it really is invention. The theory is
I see.
invention. And
Okay.
and I think that's a clear way to put it, that he invented them. And I don't see any reason to believe that. Something I point out is it's not a miracle for Jesus to claim to be God. And I find that strikes people sometimes. Skeptics,
Yes.
well, miracle, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Extraordinary
Well,
evidence. Yeah.
right, but I mean, I believe Jesus really is God, mind you, because he rose from the dead and so forth. But if we're
Yeah.
just talking about him saying before Abraham was I am, or I am the Father of one, that's it. It's not even a
Yes.
miracle. It's just a report of what he said. And so once we start to recognize all the evidence for John's meticulousness and so forth and his care, then when he reports that Jesus said something, it's like, why doubt that Jesus said it? And we
Right.
also free ourselves from that argument from silence. We can just kind of take that at face value.
If you've been impacted by Voices of WIA or any of the resources that we provide, would you consider partnering with us through a monthly gift? Your support helps us continue this very vital work and reach even more women with the tools that they need to stand firm in their faith. I personally support WIA because there aren't enough women's ministries that keep the focus on truth, and I'd love for you to join me by visiting womeninapologetics.com/donate. Yeah. Okay. That's a really good point. Um, okay. So we've talked a little bit about the differences between John and the Synoptics. What kinds of similar? Oh, did we talk about it, that as much the similarities between John, as far as Jesus is concerned, how the way he's presented in the Synoptics versus John?
I gave you some, but I would be happy to give you a couple more
Yeah, please
because
do.
there are so many. So, I call this sarcastic Jesus. Um, and so he really can be. He can be kinda harsh. Um, so in Luke, he says, they come to him and they say, "Herod's gonna kill you." And he says, "No, I'm not gonna die now because I have to be in Jerusalem. It cannot be that a prophet would die outside of Jerusalem." It's like, ooh, burn, right? That all the prophets. Yeah, I have to go to Jerusalem to die. That's where all the prophets die. Okay. Well, similarly in John, when they're gonna stone him one of those times, he says, "I've done many good works among you. For which of my good works are you stoning me?"
Yes, I remember that.
And again, it's this kind of zing. So
Yeah,
we think of Jesus as gentle and meek and mild, um, but he isn't necessarily. And what makes it, in a sense, okay is that um, he sets the standards. It's not that we set the standards, right? And
right.
so we're not here to say, man, you're mean, Jesus. You need a better tone or whatever, because he's presenting himself as the one who gets to decide, what tone he's going to take. But there's a very definite similarity there. Or his tenderness, then on the other hand. In Luke, it says he wept over the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem,
Mhm.
how often I would have gathered you, and so forth. And in John, we find him weeping at Lazarus' grave. So, he says to Mary, "Where have you laid him?" And she says, "Lord, come and see." And then it says Jesus wept, and they say, "Look
Right.
how he loved him." So that humanness is there in both of them. That
Mhm.
that combination of what I think C.S. Lewis called intolerable sternness, and at the same time, uh, gentleness and sureness of touch, it's just there. It's that blend in both of them, but in different incidents, in different stories. That's very hard to fake. That's what you find in memoirs of a real person, not made up
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great observation. It's almost like people are trying to have their cake and eat it too. Oh, John is different, therefore it's not real. Oh, wait a minute, it's not the same, therefore Jesus isn't real or Jesus can't be believed. In reality, we're just talking about the fact that Jesus had a real human personality and real human experiences and was a real human, just as much as he was God. He was human too, and the Gospels capture all of Jesus, all of Jesus' personality in both of those categories.
Yep,
Um,
it's
uh,
rounded.
yes, definitely so. And I particularly like the fact that Jesus did kind of have a cheeky side, a little bit of a tongue in
Mhm.
cheek kind of response to those people, because I think that's really interesting. Okay, so I do hear a lot, particularly in the progressive Christianity crowd, that our gospel writers were just people following the standards of their time, and that somehow that
Mhm.
diminishes the quality of the gospels. Were they
Mhm.
merely human writers, and they were just painting a picture of Jesus that they were simply wanted to promote?
Well, I have 2 answers to this. One is that, in one of my other books, The Mirror or the Mask, I've really challenged, the picture we get even of the standards of the time. Like that, oh, they didn't care as much about literal truth at that time. That's not even true of the non-biblical writings, as a whole, that it was just okay to make stuff up. That's a kind of a simplistic view. So I challenge that. But then secondly, I think the gospel authors make it clear that in their minds, fake points don't make points. And what I mean by that is
I
that
like
the
that.
theological significance arises out of real facts reported, and it arises only out of real facts reported. And so
Sure.
that's why when the writer of John, he says he was there at the cross, he who saw it bore record. He talks about they put the spear into Jesus' side, and so they didn't break his legs because he was already dead. Because breaking legs was a way to kill them faster. And they didn't do that. And he says that um it fulfilled the prophecy, not a bone of him shall be broken. But that's only because he says, "I really saw it, it really happened." So, in other words, he wouldn't have thought prophecy could be fulfilled by something that didn't happen, then it didn't really fulfill the prophecy, right?
Right.
So, in
Right.
his mind, fake points don't make points. So, why do they want to promote Jesus? because they actually believe that all of this really happened. They themselves have knowledge, and
Right.
that's why Richard Balcom makes an analogy to Holocaust memoirs, which I think is really interesting. That you can have a memoir that is truthful of something that had this overwhelming effect on you that you want to burn into people's minds, never
Mhm.
forget, never again, etc. And yet the reason for that is because you know that it's true, not because you feel that you can actually make it up when it isn't true.
Sure, that just makes sense. I feel like that just makes sense.
Hmm.
And so I'm assuming that also that you have the same kind of response when people say, "Did they change material facts to suit their intentions?" That would kind of fall into the same category, correct? They're not attempting to sell us a religion. They're trying to tell us what actually happened.
Right, right. Well, and I think the evidence for the reliability, other evidence that we'll probably get to in a little bit here, it helps to support this. So we've got multiple angles. We've got their own statements. So, like in one of the epistles of Peter, he says, "We didn't follow cunningly devised fables,
Right.
but we were ourselves witnesses of His glory." So, and the one I already quoted from John, he who saw it bore record. So we've got their own statements. Luke says, "I followed everything carefully from the beginning, uh,
Yes.
from those who were eyewitnesses." That's one line of defense. And then other lines of defense are these other reasons to believe that they're reliable, such as the undesigned coincidences that we already discussed. It's like, well, that shows that they were actually carrying out that, that it's not just a hoax, like, yeah, we're totally telling you what happened, and they're really making it up. We have evidence
Right.
that they actually followed through.
Okay, so for those of us who are kind of putting all this together, recap for us what evidence do we really have that the Gospels can be taken both seriously and fairly?
Well, I I want to. I know this sounds like buy my book, and I hate doing this, but I really want to
Okay.
encourage people who are interested in getting this in more detail to consider getting testimonies to the truth.
Okay.
Um, that is one of my most recent books. It's got study questions and everything in it, and like each chapter surveys a different kind of evidence. We've got undesigned
Okay.
coincidences in there, but also other kinds, and so it kind of puts a lot in one place in a way that's really lay friendly, or at least intended to be, and I think succeeds. But let me give you a few categories. That's what's great.
Great.
We have categories and we have categories within categories. Okay, so
Okay, great.
two big categories, what's called external evidence, what's called internal evidence. So, an example of internal evidence is undesigned coincidences, but there's more. Internal evidence comes from within the text, but it compares it to what we know true testimony is like. So
Okay.
it's not just, I believe it because the Bible said it. No, but what we're doing is we're carrying around the Gospels as texts, and then we're kind of checking them by more general concepts of what we know truthful testimony is like. And then external are the things that are more often heard of. And so there you're combining it with things like known customs, known geography, archaeological finds, that kind of thing
Sure.
that's outside the Gospels. So that's internal and external. And then I'm going to just give a couple examples within
Okay.
each of them. So, external, um, an example would be the customs surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. So, for example, the Jews say that they don't have the authority to execute. They say
Right.
that to Pilate. Um, that is confirmed by Josephus, the author Josephus.
Okay.
Specifically says they didn't. Um, Sometimes they went ahead and lynched people, like in the case of Stephen, but they weren't supposed to. They didn't have official authority to
I
do that.
see.
Um, the fact that Herod Antipas was the tetrarch of Galilee, that's mentioned in Luke, also confirmed in Josephus. And that, in fact, is why Pilate briefly sends Jesus to Herod Antipas. It's like, oh, you're from Galilee. I'll send you off. I'll get Herod's opinion. Okay, so that he was tetrarch. That's confirmed externally. Um, Four soldiers guarding the cross. John says they divided his garments into four uh, piles. So we gather from that that there were four soldiers. Um, that was called a quaternion. So we have other evidence of that that was the common size of a guard that would be set
Mhm.
would be 4. So those are some external examples. And one more, geography. John repeatedly says they went down from Cana to Capernaum. And this is just the way I would say, I went down the hill to the Shell station. And it really is down at the bottom of the hill. It's like someone who's been there. Well, Cana's in the hills. We can confirm this separately. Capernaum is actually, I believe, below sea level. It's on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So someone who's walked it, you'd think of it going down. But he just refers to that very casual way. That's another external. And then just a few categories of internal. In addition to undesigned coincidences, we have John's care in distinguishing his own interpretations from what Jesus said historically. So we gave the example earlier of um, this he said concerning
Mhm.
his body, destroy this temple and in
Mhm.
3 days.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
If John thought it was okay for him to put his own interpretations in Jesus' mouth, which you will hear from critical scholars, that what
Okay.
Jesus says in John is just what John thinks Jesus should have said,
Okay.
then why would he sort of close the quote marks and give his own interpretation scrupulously as a separate item? And he does this repeatedly. He's
Okay.
like, Jesus said this, and this is what he meant. In other words, this is what Jesus said, and this is what I think Jesus meant. He's being careful. He's doing the exact opposite. So he doesn't have Jesus say to his disciples, I was speaking there of the tabernacle of my body, said Jesus. Okay, which is what you would more expect if he thought it was okay to put his own interpretations into Jesus' mouth. So we call those asides. So it's like he pauses, hits pause and says, he said this. This is why he meant. This is what he meant. This is what he was saying. That's
Mhm.
evidence for John's care and his conscientiousness. That's internal evidence. Um, we have vivid and unnecessary details, such as when they see Jesus on the Sea of Galilee after he rises from the dead, Peter puts on his coat before he jumps in the water. Why? He says, well, he was naked. Maybe he didn't want to appear naked before Jesus. But still, would you normally put your coat on before swimming? I mean, it's going to make it harder to swim, right? So it's
Right.
this very vivid detail that would stick in the mind visually. The beloved disciple standing there and says, "It is the Lord," and then Peter's like, "I'm coming, Lord. Gotta get my coat on," and jumps in. Okay, and it's stuck in the beloved disciple's mind. It's important to remember here, and I can say this from a literary point of view, there was no hyper realistic fiction at the time. There was fiction, but it was more like romances. It wasn't like super realistic where you would note every little physical detail. So
That
there
makes
would
sense.
yeah, I mean, so there was no literary model for that, and it looks like life. And then last one I'll mention here, category of internal, is what I call unexplained allusions. So there's a place where Jesus is talking to the people, and he mentions the 18 people who were killed when the tower fell.
Oh,
It's in
yes.
one of Jesus, right?
Mhm.
And I think those people probably knew what Jesus meant, but we have no idea. And Luke maybe doesn't know. Luke doesn't try to stop and explain. Okay. Um, that again looks like life. That Jesus would use something that would resonate with his immediate
Sure.
audience, but that Luke would just include it because he knows that he heard from somebody that Jesus said it without trying to like put in some kind of explanation.
Mhm.
Again, that's very believable, very credible as an internal mark of accuracy. So there are all of these categories, and I have way more in the books, and
Sure.
categories within categories and examples within categories. It's wonderful. It's a wealth of data that's such a privilege to know and to give to people.
Yes, I think so too. I think that's one of the reasons when, as we're reading, particularly as we're reading as aspiring apologists, to see these stories that we have heard our whole lives over and over and over again, and only to come to the realization later, oh, the details in these stories, they actually point to the veracity of the Bible. They point to the fact that these people are simply retelling the events that they saw, the stories they heard. They're recalling their time with Jesus. These are just real people telling real stories, which you and I might not necessarily especially at first growing up in the church, think about or to consider as evidence. But the more you look at them, like there's no other reason for that, like you were saying, the detail to be in that story, unless whoever's telling the story is trying to give a factually correct retelling of that story. And so a detail might get included that otherwise doesn't really belong there. So I really think that's really refreshing, is to go back and read these stories we're so familiar with and start asking questions. Why is that detail there? What does that mean? What does that matter? What does it point to? Because then it gives us such a big, refreshing, new take on how trustworthy these stories are.
Yes, absolutely. And if you talk to people who give verbal memoirs, like, oh, I don't know, a veteran or something, you will notice these same kinds of things crop up there, and these same kinds of patterns and
Sure.
unnecessary details and so forth are there. And so, in that way, we can say, yeah, that is actually what accurate testimony is like.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been very interesting and very refreshing, and I'm grateful that you took the time to come by today and kind of spend time with us and help our viewers understand that the gospels really do take a lot of heat, but that the truth is on our side. So, thank you for all of your time and your expertise and your help in helping us understand that too. So, if our viewers want to follow you and see more of your work, or maybe purchase one of those books that you have written, where can they find you?
Well, so I have an author Facebook page, Lydia McGrew author on
Okay,
Facebook, and you can follow that. I have just a Lydia McGrew page, which you can also follow. You don't have to be my friend. Stuff I put on there are maybe not always as related to my books.
sure.
So yeah, like the other day I sprained my finger. Turned out I thought I broke it, and I put that on my personal page. But anyway, then also Amazon, I
Okay.
sent a link for, my author page on Amazon, just where you
Yes.
see all the different books, including Testimonies to the Truth and The Eye of the Beholder that I mentioned. Um, and I do have a website, lydiamcgrew.com. Mostly that acts as kind of a central point to get to these other places. But then the other big thing is my YouTube channel.
Okay,
Every
great.
Sunday at about noon, I release a new video with content on the Gospels, reliability, epistemology, apologetics, a lot of different topics in this same family of topics
Okay.
there every week on the Lydia McGrew YouTube channel. Oh,
Okay, so you're Oh,
and
go ahead.
there's a podcast, I forgot to send you this link, but I will, where a friend of mine ports the audio from the YouTube over to a podcast,
Oh,
if
okay,
you like to
sure,
listen
sure.
instead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lydia McGrew on YouTube, on Facebook and Amazon, it's Lydia McGrew author, correct? And then your website is Lydia McGrew.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McGrew, for being on the show with us today. That's really helpful. You know, we love apologetics around here. So thank you so much for all of your time and effort and hard work in helping us understand and grow in our ability to learn and study apologetics.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
You bet. Thank you. So, if you didn't know already, Women in Apologetics has so many resources, articles, videos, social media, quick guides, courses, merchandise, you name it, to see what we have available or to donate to the work that we do or become a member of our email community. Just visit our website at womeninapologetics.com. Everyone here on the WIA team thanks you for joining us for today's video and interview, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.